Xbox 360 was kinda weird. Microsoft was weirdly desperate to start strong and start Japanese. Editing Aiden here, this is also a time period where Capcom was really pushing for Western appeal, Western audiences, which is also partially what caused Dead Rising to come into existence. I just wanted to add that in real quick. Somehow this scored them a giant exclusive, Dead Rising, brought to us by Inafune of Mighty No. 9 fame. Released when the zombie craze was just getting back to speed, the game somehow blends Capcom's silliness with some relative seriousness in a weird open-world action survival game that's almost a precursor to the games that became incredibly popular years later with stuff like Rust. This weird, unique game, formerly exclusive to the 360, now ported to PS4, Xbox One, which is how I'll be playing it, and PC, helped launch the 360 and spawned a series of its own. To sum it up briefly, without getting too much into it, an outbreak of zombies occurs in the town of Willamette, Colorado, centralized around its mall. Photographic journalist Frank West breaks in to investigate, exploring the mall to find the source of the issue. There's lots of twists and turns and revelations, so let's cover some other stuff. Gameplay-wise, Dead Rising is fairly basic mechanically. Frank's only real options are attacking or using his currently equipped item, or fists if he's unarmed, with X, and jumping with A, at least at first. The game is heavily focused on melee, although guns are available and there are tons of improvised weapons to mess around with, most of which have unique properties and animation sets. There's way too many to go over, but for example, the baseball bat is great for knocking down tons of zombies, but doesn't kill them very well. The katana kills well, but only kills 1 or 2 zombies at a time. Large items like benches and shelves slow Frank down and can't be stored in inventory, but they hit incredibly hard, and on, including goofy joke weapons like novelty masks that blind zombies, toy swords, and pies to the face. It's always a blast to find something weird that you haven't seen before and see if it's useful in any way. Outside of this, he has a camera, which can be used to take photos of zombies and survivors, which are ranked based on scenario quality and number of characters in the frame for PP, which are used as experience points for Frank to level up. The interesting bits of the gameplay come from the more external stuff. Frank's inventory is limited, so he'll need to manage that, finding items, healing items, and managing the durability of his weapons, which break pretty quickly over time. There's a constant need to scavenge for new weapons, which drives the exploration really well, made better by the game's weapons being makeshift items, from cash registers to swords to benches and chairs and whatever else he can find. That said, some people are going to hate this game on principle because almost every side quest, and a lot of the main ones in Dead Rising, are escort missions, and the AI is infamously terrible. It's not a matter of if the survivors will try to commit suicide, but more so when. Plus, there's the ledge to the safe room, the game's hardest opponent. When so close to saving them, these little bastards always get stuck, frustratingly incapable of progressing mere steps away from the goal. Also, a less favorable aspect is the leveling system. It probably doesn't need to be in the game. There are 50 levels. Frank gains PP through photographs, reaching zombie kill thresholds, 100, 200, round numbers basically, getting kills with certain attacks, usually ones with unique animations, killing any human enemy, and from of course rescuing and saving survivors, which grants the most PP by far. The balance is surprisingly decent on the leveling for the first playthrough. Going through the story and doing most of the optional stuff when possible keeps the player at a fairly even curve, but Frank starts out so heavily restricted that it makes the early game a little more tedious than I think it has to be. Leveling up either gives Frank a new skill, fun but usually mediocre moves and attacks with a couple very strong exceptions like the jump kick and the ability to throw off attacking zombies or standing on zombies for movement, and many that are very bad like the dodge roll move that activates by itself all the time and has more vulnerability than it does iframes. Other than that, he can get bonuses to several stats. Attack raises attack, life raises Frank's max health, stock lets Frank hold an additional item, throw increases the power of thrown weapons, and speed makes Frank move quicker. These are all massively important save throw, especially stock, since Frank only starts with a meager 4 slots, which is a little too low to start with. It kind of slows the early game down. There's a period kind of at the start of the game, after the first couple survivors have been rescued, where Frank needs to wait a few hours, but his inventory is going to only have 5 or 6 slots at that point, so there's no point in running all over the mall to try to get good stuff stocked up when he has no room to hold it. It's not all bad. Levels come fairly fast, especially at the start, and the growth is good feeling. It really feels like Frank is getting used to the apocalypse and learning how to navigate it, but it feels so unnecessary at its core. It's not so much like Frank starts at a good place and gets better, but more so he starts nerfed to shit and eventually becomes the character he probably should have been a little closer to at the start. The game ironically gets easier most of the time as it goes on. All these relatively simple aspects feed into a pretty satisfying loop as well. Scavenge and gather for food and items, fight, escort, repeat. It's not never dull, but there's generally good pacing that keeps the game moving fairly well, on top of the other major element of the game, time. Dead Rising wouldn't be Dead Rising without the timer. Every event, optional or required for the story, is set to a timer, although in an amazing bit of freedom, all the side quests as well as the story itself is completely optional. There's absolutely no pressure to do anything. The constant pressure the timer puts on the player forces quick thinking, improvisation, and time management that keep the game genuinely exciting despite how basic the game can be. It's a genuine challenge to manage the literal barrage of stuff that the game expects the player to juggle, and it keeps the game constantly exciting, usually. There's a few times where there's nothing to do and a lot of time to kill, where the player just waits for things to move again, but it's fairly rare. The best part of the timer is that it makes zombies a threat. Zombies only deal 1 block of damage, 3 if the quick time event is missed. At the start of the game, they're relatively strong when Frank only has 4 health, but by the time he reaches the middle, one attack is maybe 1/10 of Frank's health bar. Lone zombies aren't threatening, but under the gun of the timer, where the player needs to make decisions between gathering supplies or pressing ahead because the time is running low on health, weapons degraded, getting supplies might just cost a survivor because of how tight the timer can be. It's really clever. It's absolutely fantastic way to keep the player on edge the entire time, even as the zombies become relatively weaker and weaker. There are a few other minor systems tossed in too, books, various semi-permanent boosts that affect Frank as long as they're in his inventory, which makes them more of a late game thing because he can't really afford to carry them around when he only has 4 slots. Drinks can be mixed using various food items, creating various drinks that have super powerful effects like doubling Frank's speed, which is absurd, or letting him spit bullets. It's a neat mechanic, but it's not very well explained and pretty well hidden to the point that I was entirely unaware of it before stumbling into its existence after being told by Grant that it existed. There's one little part where Otis mentions it to you over a call, but not only is the call missable, but none of the mechanics of the drink mixing are explained, none of the recipes are explained, and the blenders that are used for it are not in obvious places. Put pretty bluntly, the game doesn't look that great in general. It's early 360 and a little bland, although I do appreciate that the game isn't all gray. It's very often juxtaposed with colorful rooms like the toy store and serve bots, as well as a couple zombies that stick out with brighter colors. The text in the game is way too fucking small, bordering on illegible, especially on the screens of 2006 when it released, when not everyone had HD TVs. Most of the actual music in the game is pretty understated to the point of being entirely forgettable, but there's some really great, goofy indie metal songs that are used for the boss fights that are so much fun that it entirely makes up for it. Dead Rising's strongest aspect in aesthetics is the level of detail. Every room in the mall is open and explorable. A lot of them really don't have much in them, but so many have unique assets and items and clothing pieces seen nowhere else, despite the fact that the player generally doesn't have a reason to go in them. There's even tons of subtle little stuff, guns under counters, food stashed in weird spots. There's so much care put into every little nook and cranny, and it's so cool to just wander around and look in stores and see what kind of weird little things are hidden around. Another aspect that is well done on the visual end is the sheer amount of zombies on screen, which is also kind of a gameplay thing. Sometimes the game has hundreds of them all stumbling around at once, and if it was just a handful, the game wouldn't be nearly as interesting, because it's a constant push to get through these waves of zombies that act more as an obstacle to the player against the timer than they do as enemies themselves. So going through the game, obviously there will be spoilers. Don't spoiler, open inside. Dead Rising's main mode is 72-hour mode. As its name implies, it takes place across 72 in-game hours, 6 hours real-time, 2 hours a day. Events in the game will start and end based on this timer, with or without the player. Don't want to do the story? Feel free. There's no need to even leave the helipad. Frank could just sit on the roof and leave after doing literally nothing. He gets dropped off in the helicopter, he says, "I'll find out the truth." The helicopter flies off and then 3 days later comes back and Frank says, "I don't know. Didn't find anything." That said, I'll try to touch on everything. There's a lot going on, so things get a little complex. Also, I was intending to get footage of everything by going for a full all-survivor playthrough, but I'm kind of just incredibly burnt out on the game, and the all-survivors run is a pain. The game starts with Frank on a helicopter, introducing him as a renegade photojournalist being dropped off into the town of Willamette. On the ride over, Frank can use his camera to gain some early PP while getting some early exposition out of the way. Upon landing, Frank meets a mysterious man and advances into the mall's security room and into its entrance plaza. I've always found it funny that Carlito sees Frank jump out of a helicopter and asks him if he came by helicopter. It's a very, very strange thing to ask. Multiple survivors are trying to board up the mall, but Frank refuses to help because he's mostly interested in the sexy ethnic woman, but he also encounters an angry old man before some dumb hag tries to save her poodle and everyone but Frank dies. Back in the security room, Frank meets Brad and Jesse, Homeland Security agents investigating the cause of the zombie outbreak, as well as Otis, the mall janitor, or security something, who gives Frank a receiver and a map, and will call Frank to give him hints or scoops, this game's name for side quests. One downside, if Frank is hit by anything, these sometimes long calls will be interrupted, needing to be repeated with an extra text box scolding Frank for being rude. It'd be really cool if they just kept playing instead. It's really frustrating to listen to the same call 99% through 15 times. It's also worth noting that Frank can use his watch to tell the time or change which active scoop, including the main case file, his guide arrow points to. Brad runs off, and despite Otis's request, Frank follows. On the roof, he can do his first side quest, Love Lasts a Lifetime. Basically a tutorial to explain the scoop system, the first of many escort missions, and an introduction to the game's hardest boss. Jeff and Natalie are both on the roof, but too dumb to find each other or the vent without Frank. He can call to them or set a waypoint for them to follow to guide them to safety. A task that hands down is the fastest and best way to gain PP in levels. Only one problem, the ledge. The AI is bad. Even when given a weapon, they need to be babysat a lot, and given how much of this game is an escort mission, that is not a good thing. The hardest opponent in the game is this little fucking ledge. Escorted survivors struggle so hard to climb it, especially if there's multiple and they all just bump into each other and fuck around. It's so fucking bad, it's so annoying. Down in the warehouse, Frank starts Case 1-1, a dangerous encounter. Frank runs into Jessie, who herself is going to help Brad, but Frank surprises her, causing her to hurt herself, Frank offering to go help Brad instead, beginning Case 1, the introduction to the real game. Backup for Brad takes place in the food court. Upon arriving, Frank runs into Brad again, pinned down by the man from the roof, Carlito. Carlito is the game's first psychopath, human bosses who tend to be very strong and have unique fights. Carlito will run around the upper levels of the shops in the area, good places to get food by the way, shooting at Frank and Brad, who must throw items or shoot back until he eventually wears out and leaves. Being the tutorial psycho, he doesn't pose much threat. Frank's help, as well as the photos of the old man he took from the intro, convince Brad to trade information. Frank gets his scoop and Brad finds the mystery man. Immediately after, an odd old man starts. Brad runs into the entrance plaza to find the old man, while Frank follows through El Fresco Plaza, an outdoor area that's very dense with zombies. In the entrance plaza, the old man, Dr. Barnaby, locks himself inside the bookstore, refusing to come out. From here, Frank and Brad can return to the security room to end Case 1 with a temporary agreement, a cutscene where Jesse realizes the signal to the outside world is jammed and they can't call for help. Frank informs Brad and Jesse of the helicopter returning in 3 days, and Brad leaves to find supplies. Between Case 1 and 2, depending on speed, are going to be a few hours. Case 2 doesn't start until the morning of day 2, but there's a few events that fill that gap. After 4 PM, Frank will have a minor event in the warehouse, the Queen, where he finds the zombie queen in the warehouse and realizes that when it's killed, all the zombies around it die. This comes up a lot more later, but it's an important little intro to it. At about 7, it gets dark outside every day, zombies also become more aggressive and numerous, and at about 10, the lights go off for the night. The mall becomes dark inside, and a few other cute minor details occur as well, like the escalators turning off. There's also numerous scoops, some called in by Otis, others unmarked. In Man in a Bind, an employee in the entrance plaza has locked himself in a closet and needs saving. The gun shop is available from the beginning of day 1 to the end of day 2. Going there lets Frank fight the psychopath Cletus, who shoots a shotgun at him from across his counter. Attempting to cross the counter to get some guns will cause Cletus to toss him back over. He's tough for an early fight, but the reward of infinite guns is worth it. Quick note, I have beaten all of the psychopaths in this game, and I have gotten most survivors on the 360 version of this game. I was so worn out that I did not go back for this, so there's some stuff that is just not going to have corresponding footage, unfortunately. I wore myself out on this game a lot. Cut from the same cloth as a man named Kent appear in Paradise Plaza. He'll jump around attacking zombies, asking Frank to get 2 solid pictures of him. Doing so adds the next scoop, Photo Challenge. The next day at noon, Frank can give Kent a good erotic photo to start Photographer's Pride the following day at noon. If even 5 in-game minutes late to Photographer's Pride, Kent will kill a survivor who can otherwise be saved. A fun little surprise psychopath who's set up to be yet another survivor, and a good foil for Frank being a photographer himself. Regardless, Frank will need to kill Kent, who attacks with jumping kicks and his pistol. The barricade pair are in El Fresco Plaza, hiding in a store of junk piled in front. One of the survivors will attack Frank, but after some sense is beaten into him, the two can be rescued. Around the same time, a mother's lament appears in El Fresco. A woman is hiding in a jewelry store, distraught over the loss of her child, and will need to be talked to for quite a long while to convince her to come with. Shortly after, the prisoners appear in the courtyard, Leisure Park, a group of 3 minor psychos in a jeep with a mounted machine gun. Early game, these guys are monsters. One drives, one shoots, and one rides shotgun, doing very little. Killing them temporarily gives Frank access to their jeep with the machine gun mounted on it. The prisoners respawn every night at midnight, but during their first encounter, they'll be terrorizing another survivor that can be saved. Out of Control is another psychopath mission, a very tough one, but with 2 good rewards. A psychotic clown named Adam is running the ride in Wonderland Park with a survivor trapped on it. Adam is tough, he's fast, he has a huge variety of attacks, balloons that stun Frank, a gun when at range, and his chainsaw attack, which decimates Frank's health bar in the early game. Once Adam goes down, Frank can take his small chainsaw, one of the most powerful weapons in the game, which respawns every time Frank comes back, and the survivor will open a shortcut from the bathroom, which all serve as save points to the bathroom on the other side of the mall in Paradise Plaza, right next to the security room. It's a very tough fight, but worth it if willing to deal with it. Japanese Tourist is also in Wonderland Plaza. Frank comes across 2 Japanese men who speak no English. If he tries to talk to them, they'll run off unless he first finds the Japanese conversation book, in which case they have a pretty funny exchange about his shitty Japanese, which really shows the game's sense of humor before following Frank back to security. It's one of the few times books are necessary, but a pretty good intro on how useful they can be, I suppose. Many have great effects like bonus experience and increased weapon durability. Finally, Shadow of the North Plaza has a man in the North Plaza injured who Frank needs to support to get him back to the security room. Thankfully, supporting, carrying, or holding hands with characters seems to give Frank and the survivors some leeway on getting hit, which makes these segments far less miserable than they could be. Less than regular survivors most of the time, because Frank has a lot more control over where they go. All this stuff starts during and after Case 1, and I think it highlights both how unique and varied these scoops can be and how chaotic and difficult everything can be to juggle. It's a fun challenge to prioritize all these moving pieces, but like I said, it's reasonable to not like escort missions, especially with AI this completely fucked. There's no need to do the scoops the player doesn't want, or any at all. Everything is optional, like I said. There's just a ton of freedom, which makes the game very interesting. The gap between Case 1 and Case 2 might be slightly too long. It's likely that even doing most or all of the scoops, Frank will have some time to kill, and with his early game inventory being so small, it's not like he can gather too much supplies during the gap. Starting with Case 2-1, image in the monitor, things only get more chaotic and fast-paced from here, almost non-stop. At 6 AM, Jesse sees Carlito drag Dr. Barnaby out of the bookstore. In the entrance plaza, a second fight with Carlito begins. Rescue the professor. Dr. Barnaby is tied up, hanging above zombies, and Brad and Frank need to fight Carlito on the second floor. A much deadlier fight as Carlito's sniper hits hard, only avoidable by breaking his line of sight. And when he's approached, he runs away, more or less requiring ranged weapons or a lot of chasing. Upon defeating Carlito, Brad and Carlito shoot each other, Carlito running off and Brad heading back to the security room, with Frank carrying Barnaby behind. Brad's injury causes him to fall ill, and Frank needs to travel to the grocery store in North Plaza to get a first aid kit for the final part of Case 2, Medicine Run. In the grocery store, Frank encounters Steven, the deranged manager who has the woman from the entrance plaza in a shopping cart covered by blades. Frank, of course, must fight the psychopath who pushes the cart at Frank, avoidable by dipping between or climbing aisles, or attacks by shooting with his shotgun when Frank is out of range. He's pretty tough, but the grocery store is littered with food for healing, which makes it a little easier. He's one of my favorite psychos by far. He's a real standout in the fight department, and his death scene is really something.
Have a nice day. Clean up! Register 6!
The girl, Isabella, was also in the store looking for first aid to help her brother Carlito. She says that the zombies are revenge for Santa Cabeza and leaves before Frank goes back to the security room with the medkits. There's another gap in this case and a handful of scoops. Lovers has 2 survivors in a shoe store, boyfriend and girlfriend, with the boyfriend severely injured. The man requests bullets and will kill himself if they are given, causing the woman to reject rescue. Instead, Frank needs to deny them and convince both of them to come. It's a really neat little story beat that switches up the player's expectations of just doing what they're told. The Hatchet Man is a psychopath holding 3 survivors hostage in North Plaza. Cliff's story is surprisingly sad, a Vietnam veteran who breaks due to his family being killed by zombies, which is also a good change from more malicious psychos. Cliff isn't a pushover either, using a mixture of fast machete attacks up close and grenades when far. The Coward is in Alfresca Plaza and he's too afraid to follow Frank, needing a little beating to get him moving. In Paradise Plaza is another unmarked scoop, twin sisters, one standing in the toy store and one being mobbed by zombies. Due to the proximity to the security room and the time they appear, it's likely that when Frank stumbles into it, he'll already have survivors, which complicates the rescue a bit. While there aren't as many scoops in this gap, it's a short gap, 5 hours at best compared to the almost 18 between Case 1 and 2. At 11, Case 3 begins. The professor's passed. Barnaby awakens and Jesse asks him about Santa Cabeza. Jessie seems to know more than what she's letting on, and the two refuse to talk while Frank is around. That's all for case 3, it's just a cutscene. In the 4-hour gap between case 4 though, there's some more stuff going on. The restaurant man hangs out in the sandwich shop in Paradise Plaza and refuses to join Frank unless he's given any type of food. Above the Law has a policewoman, Jo, take 4 survivors hostage. If the case isn't started immediately, she'll begin killing hostages every few in-game hours, and while she's fought, she'll also actively attacking them, making her a giant threat to players looking to rescue all hostages. She's slow, but her stun gun leaves Frank open to plenty of follow-ups. Hanging by a thread has 2 survivors hanging from the giant rabbit in Wonderland Plaza, mobbed with a pile of zombies below. Once the mob is clear, Frank can hit them with a thrown item to drop them to the ground and save them. Finally is the cult, one of Dead Rising's weirdest and coolest elements. When Frank goes to Paradise Plaza, he'll encounter a ton of cult members surrounding a box with a survivor in it. After this first appearance, the cult members will become regular enemies, attacking more intelligently than zombies, coming in groups, using knives, suicide bombing when they're injured, and blowing gas at Frank to knock him out and take him to their secret lair where he'll need to kill all of them to escape. The really fun part is that they aren't really tied to the zombie mystery, they're just weirdos taking advantage of the chaos to practice ritual sacrifice for their cult. It's a really neat detail. I think a lesser game would have somehow tied them to the zombie thing, but they're just an element in this game. It's a really neat touch. Sometime on day 3, if followed up on in a later scoop or not, they just go away. They've either achieved their shit and just left, or Frank has dealt with them. It's just a really fun detail. The cult's a really cool little aspect of this game. At 3 PM, Case 4 starts with yet another cutscene, another source. Frank sees Isabella on the security monitor, beginning girl hunting. Once Frank reaches the North Plaza, he needs to fight Isabella as a psychopath. She's on a motorcycle and drives back and forth, running over Frank, which understandably hurts a lot, and if Frank tries to climb on the walkways in the area, she'll shoot. This fight is only as hard as the player makes it though. Standing on low objects breaks her AI and causes her to fruitlessly ram into walls while Frank shoots her in the face. Once Isabelle is defeated, she promises to talk to Frank in a few hours once she realizes that he's a journalist, about how it was all the US's fault that the zombies came to be once she's done recovering from her injuries, and Frank can return to the security room where Barnaby claims that the zombies were created by drugs from the cartel. There's also a number of scoops available in the 9-ish hour gap between cases 4 and 5. 3 of these are tied together, they all start at once and take place in the entrance plaza. Marco the Sniper has 3 psychos on the top floor of the entrance plaza. They obviously all use snipers, but they're fairly weak and run from Frank. Given he's leveled up enough at this point, he should be able to outrun them and can corral them and chase them down with melee, or shoot back at them if not. These 3 guard 1 survivor, but there are a few more in the area. Antique Lover, a guy in the antique shop. A fantastic store by the way, as it contains the absolutely amazing katana weapon, which is one of the strongest melee weapons in the game, barring the small chainsaws. The woman who didn't make it has 2 survivors, one on the bottom floor and one on the top, who need to be reunited for a total of 4, all tied to Marco the Sniper. There's also Ronald's Appetite, a mutiny event where the restaurant man will take a bunch of survivors out to look for food and get them killed if Frank doesn't give him any piece of food. Messing this up can cost Frank like 10 survivors, it's absolutely ridiculous. At midnight, 5-1, a promise to Isabella starts in one of North Plaza's empty rooms. Isabella will burst in, being attacked by a single zombie. Once Frank saves her, she tells him that Carlito shot her in a fit of rage and passes out, immediately starting transporting Isabella. Frank needs to carry Isabella back to the security room, which thankfully makes him pretty resistant to zombies. Frank, Brad, and Jesse take her in to ask about Carlito's plans when she wakes up. While it's definitely possible to get to the security room before Case 6 starts, the short 3-hour gap will almost guarantee it begins right away. Regardless, there are a few scoops that start during Case 5, so I'll touch on them really quick. A strange group has Frank go to the theater to deal with the True Eye Cult's leader. Sean is a massive cunt who flails around with his massive ranged sword and leaps through the air, only really vulnerable after missing an attack. Killing him lets Frank free an incredible 5 survivors at once. Kindle appears at midnight for the scoop Dressed for Action in the North Plaza, right next to where Frank meets Isabella, so he's basically free, plus he has a shotgun which makes him pretty useful as a survivor. Gunshop Standoff has 3 survivors barricaded in the gun store that shoot at Frank on approach. If Frank leaves, they'll realize he's not a zombie, and if he already has, or goes to get a photo of the vent leading to the security room, they'll join him, toting a bunch of guns, also very useful survivors. The drunkard takes place in the food court. A man is just drinking a lot there and joins Frank when he tries to leave without him. Finally is the event Floyd the Sommelier, where the antique shop guy will ask for a bottle of wine. Unlike the previous event, there's no consequence of failure, just a PP bonus for completion. As I said, Case 6, Santa Cabeza, will likely start right as Case 5 ends. Isabella awakens and talks to Brad. Isabella finally gives the first big reveal of the game. The Santa Cabeza zombie outbreak was caused by Barnaby's attempt to increase cattle production to meet American consumer demands. A sly little jab at Americans being fat, and one of the very few times that this movie dives into the kind of critique of capitalism that Dawn of the Dead, which clearly inspired this game, had. Barnaby becomes a zombie and will attack Jessie, but Frank saves her, and Isabella informs the group that the zombie outbreak in Willamette is revenge for what Barnaby did to Santa Cabeza. Now there's 8 hours before Case 7 and a few new scoops to do. Long-haired punk has a psychopath trapping 3 survivors in a store in Wonderland Plaza. He throws Molotovs and bombs at Frank's, and when defeated, he accidentally sets himself on fire. In a nice little twist, Frank can put him out with a fire extinguisher, turning him into a survivor as well. The woman left behind and a sick man are both survivors in Wonderland as well, who have no real special tricks. Case 7, The Last Resort, begins at 11 AM with Isabella revealing Carlito's backup plan, flooding the mall's underground tunnels with gas and setting off a series of time bombs to blow the mall to pieces and spread zombie spores in the wind. Bomb collector is what it sounds like. Frank goes into the maintenance tunnel to collect all 5 bombs. Failing to do so gives Frank a unique ending, ending F, which has the mall explode. After collecting the first bomb, Carlito will begin chasing Frank in a moving van, violently smashing into Frank. Frank can avoid him or fight him. As Carlito takes damage, he'll drive off before returning shortly after. If he's damaged completely, Brad will hold him off, letting Frank find the rest of the bombs uninterrupted. The tunnels are lousy with zombies, it's pretty tough to just move around. Once all 5 bombs are dealt with, Frank gets them out just in time as Carlito locks Brad in the underground warehouse. While not necessary, Frank can go down to the warehouse and see zombie Brad if he wants. The scoops for this one are tough. There's very little wiggle room given the bombs, and this tight time frame includes the end of Kent's quest line. Kindle's betrayal is another mutiny. Frank just needs to go talk to him to calm him down and prevent a bunch of survivors from leaving, but this comes directly as the bomb thing is going on. A Woman in Despair takes place in Paradise Plaza, but she'll only join Frank if Isabella's in the security room, as she's been bitten and only Isabella can hold off the virus. Close to the finish now, Case 8-1, Jamming Device, starts at 5. Isabella offers to take Frank to Carlito's hideout to check his computers and figure out his next move. Frank needs to bring Isabella to Carlito's hideout in the North Plaza, where she'll start trying to find the password to access his laptop. Jesse calls Frank, starting Jesse's discovery. Once he returns to the safe room, Jesse shows him footage of Carlito being dragged into the freezer in the maintenance tunnels. The Butcher is the final main mission. Frank needs to fight Larry, who's trying to serve and eat Carlito. Larry hits hard as fuck and tosses insanely damaging dead pigs at Frank. He's not unreasonable, but he's a pretty decent challenge. After defeating Larry, Frank talks to Carlito as he dies. Carlito gives Frank his necklace to give to Isabella, with Frank promising to share the truth of Santa Cabeza. Despite everything, Carlito is just a man who lost everything he knew. It doesn't try to redeem him, but comes to a really smart understanding about who he is and why he did what he did. There's only a few scoops left before it's time for the ending. Paul's present has former psychopath Paul give Frank unlimited Molotovs in exchange for not revealing what he did. Simone the Gunslinger lets Frank give a survivor a gun for bonus PP, as does Cheryl's request where she wants Frank to take good pictures of her. None of these cases have negative consequences for failure. Finally, at 10 PM, the fact starts. This is the endgame, so a lot goes on. Frank returns to Isabella, giving her Carlito's necklace. The locket helps her get Carlito's password, disabling the jamming device, allowing Jesse to contact headquarters. While the facts technically ends here, there's a bunch of stuff that comes after. The government decides to cover up the Willamette incident and begins sending in special forces to remove all survivors, witnesses, and zombies. Jesse somehow becomes zombified, and when Frank returns to the security room, he finds zombie Jesse, alongside a note from Otis informing him that he took the survivors to safety in a stolen helicopter. He says he doesn't want to be seen as a coward. How could anyone call an old man stealing a military helicopter a coward? At midnight, the mall will be flooded with special forces. They're strong and have machine guns and move in packs. Zombies are all but gone, and it's best to avoid the special forces as much as possible. For the next 10 in-game hours, Frank is free to do whatever. There's no mission, just a bunch of time to kill to collect supplies, go for achievements, or just stand around with Isabella. After the special forces leave at 10, Frank can talk to Isabella, who tells him to go to the helicopter. At noon, the helicopter comes, whether Frank is there or not, resulting in a few different endings. From worst to best is ending F, which I mentioned earlier, letting the bombs blow up. If Frank fails to complete the cases and misses the helicopter, ending E, Otis takes the survivors onto the helicopter. If Frank is captured by special forces and can't escape, he gets ending D, leaving Willamette as a prisoner of the government. If Frank doesn't talk to Isabella after the facts, or completes all the cases but misses the helicopter, ending C, a zombie sneaks up on the helicopter pilot and kills him. If Frank doesn't finish the cases but ends up on the helipad, ending B, Frank takes the survivors onto the helicopter, but the Willamette incident's origins remain a mystery. Finally, ending A, finish the cases, talk to Isabel, and reach the helipad. The helicopter arrives, but a zombie in the back causes it to crash and explode. Video games and helicopter crashes go together like peanut butter and jelly. In defeat, Frank falls to his knees as zombie surrounds him. This ending was later confirmed to be canon. It's an interesting ending. There's a lot of interesting ideas in the game as well. While many would see the mall and associate it with Dawn of the Dead, which I think is an undeniable influence on the game, Dawn of the Dead is a story about the mindlessness of consumers. While Dead Rising has those elements touched on a little bit with the beef consumption, which could also be seen as something of an environmental message, it's much more a story of government mistrust and their willingness to hide inconvenient truths. It's an interesting twist given the post-9/11. Oh right, there's more. Overtime mode begins with Isabella saving Frank, picking up right from where ending A left off. Frank has been bitten and has 24 hours before he turns into a zombie. Special forces are still in the mall, despite them leaving at the end of 72-hour mode, plus the zombies have somehow refilled the mall as well. Accompanied by drones that snitch on Frank and attract the special forces members, and a helicopter that hangs out in the courtyard. To hold off the infection, Frank needs to find 8 items: a first aid kit, a magnifying glass, cold spray, a blender, developing solution, coffee filters, a camp stove, and a perfume bottle, spread all over the mall, plus 10 queens found in random zombies. There's a lot of chaos in the mall and getting everything is going to take a bit of work. After getting Frank taken care of, Isabella finds a new part of Carlito's plan on his laptop. 50 orphan children infected with the zombie virus sent all across America to make sure that things get bad. When the power goes out, Frank needs to go to the clock tower in the courtyard to get a generator, which shows him a hole through the tower, loaded with zombies but a potential route out of the mall. Isabella finds a hormone that repulses zombies, and with that, her and Frank can get through the clock tower and out of the mall. Passing through the tunnel, with zombies around them falling over as they pass due to the hormone, which is really satisfying after everything the game has thrown at the player before, although kind of fucky because Isabella separates from Frank easily. With this, the two get to fight the final bosses. Stealing a jeep, the two get in a rail shooting segment where Frank drives laps while the player controls Isabella in the gunner seat, shooting at a tank and the missiles and turrets it launches. It's so dull and so fucking long, it is ridiculously long. The true final boss isn't better. Brock is the final psychopath, head of the special forces. He goes 1v1 no items against Frank, which goes entirely against the game's base gameplay. Preparedness and inventory management are completely out the window just for this final boss. Higher level players are going to have slightly more options, but I'm not really sure what the dev intended strategy is. The only effective thing I've found is going to the lower area of the tank and jump kicking. Brock seems to expect Frank to leap up to the top part of the tank, and it leaves him open for attacks somehow. Repeat over and over and over. It's pretty fucking tedious. With Brock dead, Isabella and Frank escape Willamette and spread the story, with the government accepting light responsibility, but eventually as they do, people forget, and the results of Carlito's Orphans remains an open mystery. All in all, it's a really fun game. There's a ton of freedom, everything is a weapon, and missions are a mere suggestion. The story is decent, the sandbox is fun to mess around in. The game's governmental mistrust is interesting despite the fact that it doesn't tie into its setting very much. It's all pretty neat. 72-hour mode and overtime mode, which is just an extension of it, are both really fun. On the other hand, infinity mode is a fucking drag. It's unlocked by completing overtime mode, and in some ways it's surprisingly ahead of the curve, an early version of those popular Steam early access survival games like Rust, Don't Starve, and all the Rust knockoffs in the world. The mall has survivors and psychos strewn about randomly at random times, and Frank's health slowly decreases over time as he gets hungry. To this end, Frank needs to constantly hunt for food and stay alive as long as possible. It's technically not an infinity mode, despite the name, because eventually survivors and psychos stop spawning, so there's a point where there's just no more time to continue, but it's like 72 days in, which is a long time, real time. The first step is to find the 3 healing books that make food stronger in the mall, the second step is to gather food by killing people, and the third is to find somewhere safe and stare at the walls until Frank's health is almost gone, then eat. After this, it's just repeat, 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 repeat. It's dull, and the achievements for it require 10 and 14 real-life hours to get through. 5-day Survivor and 7-day Survivor. Back when the Xbox 360 first came out, as this was a launch title for it, the original model Xbox 360 was well known for its red ring of death, which is caused in some way by overheating. There's a lot of different ideas on what causes it, but just the fact that they expected the Xbox 360 to stay on for 14 real-life hours. I remember a lot of people complained about how this survival mode just completely fucked up their 360s, and I just cannot be fucked to do survival mode all day regardless. As far as I'm concerned, there's almost nothing interesting in infinity mode. It is just a waste of space. Dead Rising is loaded with secrets and unlockables. Secrets flood the mall. I've covered some cool ones already, but there's also unlockables. Most are just clothes tied to stuff like saving 50 survivors, killing psychopaths, and taking out the helicopter. These unlockables also tend to be cute Capcom references, much like the Servbot masks in the toy store, Arthur's boxers from Ghosts and Goblins, and some Mega Man outfit pieces. There's also two extremely powerful unlockable weapons. The real Mega Buster, a Mega Man gun with 300 shots that respawns and hits as hard as a small chainsaw, but from range. That is to say, 3 shots most psychopaths, 1 shot some, and I don't know if there's anything that can take more than 5 hits. But unlocking it requires killing 53,594 zombies, the population of Willamette. This is a big ass grind. Even just grinding by driving around the underground, which is I think the fastest method, it takes about 3 hours, it's a little excessive. The real laser sword based on Zero Z Saber isn't much better for the unlock, 5 days in survival mode, 10 hours. I don't know why I said isn't much better, it's blatantly worse. That said, the thing's even stronger than the Mega Buster. Either weapon completely trivializes the game, Mega Buster a little more so given it's ranged, and its unlock requirement is a lot less awful, but still bad. It's a really cool idea to tie in-game stuff to achievements, even if some of them are pretty bullshit, and it's always cool to see so much extra shit crammed into the game. There's also a comic, Dead Rising: Road to Fortune. It's made to bridge the gap between the first and second games, and it is, for the most part, more of a second game comic. It shows how Isabella gets taken away by Homeland Security after Frank and Isabella escape from the construction yard. Frank runs around Nevada, and the Fortune City outbreak starts, giving Chuck Green, protagonist of Dead Rising 2's backstory. It's whatever, it's a Dead Rising 2 ad. The art style is really blocky and sketchy, and while it sometimes looks cool on the zombies, it tends to look a little lazy, like unfinished sketches were inked and colored. I really don't have a lot to say to it, it's just like a 4-issue ad. There's also a mobile version of Dead Rising that isn't available anymore. It was on like the iPod Touch 3. It's apparently very bad and looks like it is, and it's only playable on incredibly ancient devices. I'm gonna have to pass on that. Dead Rising was a huge hit on release and would go on to develop a strong fan base and an interesting series. It seems Capcom never managed to recapture the first game to fans, especially when 3 rolled around and 4 seemed to be an unmitigated disaster. Still, its fanbase is very dedicated. To hate a game so fiercely like Dead Rising 4 really shows some intense love for the game. I think it's safe to call Dead Rising, if nothing else, incredibly unique and memorable. I mean, what can I really say? It's a fun game. There's nothing like it. The scale of the zombies and the sheer amount, and the improvisation of weapons and the shitty indie metal. It's so much fun to play regardless of how the player decides to play it. The freedom on display is absolutely insane. There really aren't a lot of games that just give the player the ability to skip every element of the story and just fuck around. It's such a unique game, even from its sequels. The story hits a lot of cool notes, not incredibly well told, but there's some cool ideas with all the governmental mistrust. It'd be a real shame if someone butchered the game into an awkward mess for inferior hardware. Maybe more isn't always better. In 2009, 3 years following Dead Rising's release and only a year before Dead Rising 2's, Capcom would, for whatever reason, decide now was the perfect time to recreate Dead Rising in the Resident Evil 4 engine. Made by the same guy as Resident Evil 4's Wii ports, Dead Rising: Chop Till You Drop is something very unique to say the least. Surprisingly, the story of the game has no major changes. The cases are all intact, as are the cutscenes. The only major changes are the scoops, which are all scoops from the main game, but they come at different times, sometimes for seemingly no reason. The story's only major change is the removal of alternate endings, and the game always goes into overtime. The gameplay is where shit really goes off the rail. This thing feels like a ROM hack of Resident Evil 4 with a Dead Rising skin, because it is. It's really reminiscent of those ROM hacks that port Ocarina of Time levels into Mario 64 and vice versa. The gameplay is exactly Resident Evil 4 tank controls and all, which makes the game far heavier on the shooting aspect, with melee almost completely sidelined. Every gun is ported over directly from Resident Evil 4, which means they're fun to use, but there's a large flaw. Resident Evil's control and systems were made to fight a handful of enemies at a time, who are generally more threatening and are supported by that game's lack of resources. Players will rarely fight more than 4 or 5 enemies at a time, but they have to constantly be on the lookout for ink ribbons for saving, herbs for healing, and ammo, which are in constant demand. While chopped zombie count doesn't even come close to the 360 versions, it's usually more like 20 enemies at a time as opposed to hundreds. 20 enemies are a lot for anything but the shotgun, which is generally very tedious, but they're also made unthreatening by the abundance of resources and lack of time management. Yep, the timer is gone for most missions, but hold that thought for a second. To make up for this, the game adds special zombies, dogs, fast and annoying, parrots that drop hand grenades and are hard to hit, and listen, I can accept that a mall in Colorado has a poodle problem, but in what world would even one parrot be in Colorado? Colorado is fucking cold. Those are tropical birds. The Psycho Joe appears as a gigantic cop who hits really hard. Zombie Kents appear, they aren't unique and act just like Ken, save that they respawn, and Zombie Cliffs who also respawn and just charge at Frank. Most of these are genuine threats, at least until the player's gotten some gun upgrades, but they're also easy to deal with from range. Back to the timer, the game has an entirely new structure. The freedom has been completely ripped out. Between cases, Frank can't leave and explore or just wait for the next case to start. To progress, he must complete missions, scoops ripped right from the main game. Doing well in these missions may also unlock bonus missions, which are also non-optional. Your reward for doing well is having to do more stuff. Once all missions are completed, the next case starts. There's no option to ignore cases or scoops, it's a linear adventure. There's also not a ton of freedom in the world design. To force players to take their time and the path laid out, paths are often arbitrarily blocked, while other areas, especially the courtyard, have been run through the dryer a dozen times and miniaturized, from a few minutes to cross to literally seconds. Only a few select cases have timers, which relieves the pressure of the game and makes it easy to mess around and farm healing items, although missions, the scoops, are timed for ranking, which seems to matter little outside of unlocking bonus missions, and maybe they're tied to some certain weapon and item unlocks. It's kind of hard to tell. There's not a lot of info about this game online, surprisingly. While there are still a bunch of melee weapons, Frank can only hold one and they don't count against his inventory space. Only food and guns do, with books having their own inventory. As such, leveling is of much less importance too, as it only increases melee damage, melee weapon durability, inventory, which is a non-issue. In fact, since the player only has guns taking up space, their inventory tends to be maxed out with food at all times, making the game extremely easy, and the book inventory, which is even more of a non-issue. Health increases are now tied to juices, a special item given for completing some missions called white juice that can also be made by mixing any juice with protein powder, another quest reward. Controversially, the fan favorite photography mechanic is absent. It probably could have been pretty cool with the motion control and pointer aiming, presumably they couldn't get it working in some way, so it's just completely cut. It's so iconic to the series that its absence is incredibly jarring, especially given that Frank is literally a photographer. Frank's movement is also nerfed. Not just the tank controls, but he's also slower and lacks a jump, meaning clearing out any zombies in front of him is almost a necessity. Ammo is also a random drop from killing zombies, so it's not impossible that Frank runs out of good ammo and ends up having to awkwardly use the rifle, which is terrible at close range, to scrape by and grind for shotgun ammo at times. All this is to say that player choice and freedom are almost entirely gone. The game loses a lot from this, although I don't think it's entirely irredeemable. Resident Evil 4's base gameplay is fun, it just doesn't work with this game's systems very well. Also, while I wouldn't call Dead Rising hard, maybe medium unless going for all survivors and psychos, because the AI sucks, Chop Till You Drop is fairly easy. It might be a little tough at the start, but some early missions give lots of rewards like an infinitely respawning small chainsaw in the security room, the best melee weapon in the game, and 4 fruits that respawn in the same spot. They even respawn by saving and loading, so if really desperate for healing, Frank can just reload over and over again to completely fill his inventory with food. The AI has also been moderately improved. They don't get stuck on the ledge anymore, and they tend to be better at not getting swarmed, although there's also far less zombies to get swarmed by. They aren't a whole lot better, but there is a slight improvement. Unsurprisingly, this game looks fucking rough. The cutscenes are terrible full motion videos of the 360 version, which also means costumes don't carry into the cutscenes. Everything is muddy and the mall is taking huge hits in detail. A lot of rooms are blocked off, and like I said, the courtyard is non-existent. Zombies have gone from a sea of moving bodies to contend with to a series of sparse puddles that really ruin the impact of the whole thing. It really shows off how impressive the scale of the 360 version is. Also at night on default settings, this game is a fucking game for the blind. Look at this fucking shit. I'm just blindly following the arrow, praying that I'm moving in the right direction. I had to back out to the main menu and turn on bright night mode and up the brightness to 30 from 0. It's pretty progressive of them to make games for the disabled, but holy fucking shit. There's a lot of changes to the game as a whole. I'll be covering some of the highlights here because some of these are fucking wild. If I don't mention something, it's more or less unchanged besides the obvious gameplay mechanic changes. In the intro, the photography segment is obviously gone because photography as a whole is gone. After Case 1-1, Frank is forced to do his first few missions, scoops more or less lifted from the main game. Keep in mind missions are one at a time, no going for multiple in one run. These missions are also required, no option. The first two are Love Lasts a Lifetime and Twin Sisters, where Twin Sisters is actually a day 2 scoop, put at a time where Frank will likely have other survivors with him to increase the challenge. Because it's been moved to the place it has, it's very easy. Case 1-2 adds parrots and poodles to the courtyard, and they'll start to appear throughout the rest of the game in very annoying spots. They're both very annoying enemies. Also, apparently, Carlito being on top of the restaurants in the food court was too difficult to implement, so he instead just flails around on the ground level, doing not much. He kinda, I don't know what he's supposed to be doing here. Before Case 2 begins, Frank needs to clear a bunch of missions to progress. Restaurant Man is again early and has a small extra step of grabbing a steak from the second floor, while Woman in Despair is unchanged. The gun shop, the Cletus fight is mostly the same, but with a quick time event to dodge his attacks. Additionally, Cletus doesn't die for whatever reason. Instead, he runs the gun shop, allowing Frank to sell guns, buy new guns, usually upgrades to default guns, such as better shotguns, better rifles, etc. He can buy books from the gun shop that give him new moves, and ammo capacity upgrades. Out of Control comes next. Adam is much easier, but fights in mostly the same ways as before. His AI is a little bad as he'll try to dodge when aimed at, so wiggling the cursor over him causes him to not attack and just keep dodging while getting free hits between. The first bonus mission is unlocked somehow here. I think it's unlocked by getting an S rank on something, probably Out of Control, but the lack of info on Chop Till You Drop makes it kinda hard to tell precisely, and I don't think getting the bonus missions is always tied to getting an S rank, because there are times where the mission I thought I was supposed to get an S rank on, I got an A rank on and still got the bonus mission, so I'm not really sure what's up with that. The bonus mission is the Drunkard, which is unchanged. Case 2-2 introduces the Joes, the giant 9-foot tall cops who stomp around. Carlito is mostly the same, but Frank can do a quick time event to avoid his shots, which makes it a little easier. Steve's fight in the grocery store is also mostly unchanged. Before Case 3 is Man in the Bind, which is unchanged, and getting an S rank unlocks the bonus mission Lovers, which is also unchanged. Case 4 starts with even more scoops. Japanese Tourist moves the tourists out of the bookstore where they're found in the 360 version, so Frank will need to stop at the bookstore first for the Japanese conversation book. Without prior knowledge, it might be kind of hard to stumble into the solution. Maybe they expected this to be something that people who'd already played the 360 version played. A Mother's Lament and The Woman Who Didn't Make It are unchanged. After these, Frank is sent to the entrance plaza to kill zombies for a bit, just out of the blue, where he meets the zombie Kent for the first time. Killing Kent and a handful of other zombies will abruptly end this little time waster. Barricade Pair and Shadow of the North Plaza are both unchanged, and one or both somehow unlock the bonus Gun Shop Standoff. This one is mostly unchanged, but on the 360 with prior knowledge, Frank can take the required picture of the event beforehand. On Wii, where photography doesn't exist, Frank must backtrack to the security room and back to the gun shop, then back to the security room after going to the gun shop. Remember, if the bonus is unlocked, it's non-optional, so do too good and you will just be stuck with this. Case 4-2 introduces Zombie Cliff before anything else. Isabel in the motorcycle fight is mostly unchanged, but Frank can't cheese it by standing on trash because he does not have a jump. Instead, he can cheese it by just bringing tons of food and tanking hits. The Cult, Antique Lover, and the bonus mission Mark of the Sniper are all virtually unchanged, although the cult members can't kidnap Frank as far as I'm aware. In Case 5, Isabella can't be carried, as carrying, hand-holding, and supporting survivors, as well as giving them weapons, are all cut because those weren't mechanics in Resident Evil 4. Case 6 starts immediately, which isn't always true on 360, just usually. There's a save point between 5 and 6, between them just being 2 cutscenes in a row. Hanging by a thread, the coward and the bonus dressed for action are all unchanged. After, Frank finally gets to do prisoners, perhaps the most gimped part of the game. The incredibly memorable and threatening prisoners are reduced to nothing but a terrible QuickTime event. The whole fight is just a long QTE. This is perhaps the game's most embarrassing point. 7-2 has a lot going on. Talking to Otis reveals that the restaurant man is left to find food, but doesn't elaborate. I'm sure he's in the food somewhere, but I don't know where, so I guess I lost those survivors, but the game also doesn't seem to keep track. The bomb disposal is one of the few time missions in the game. 30 minutes to get all the bombs, which is quite a bit honestly. The whole mission has been changed to some extent. Frank can use the car the whole time, and it seems to be invincible, or very damn near invincible. Each parking lot that one of the bombs is in has its own loading zone that automatically kicks Frank out because the Wii is incredibly weak, which means just driving between these loading zones with a small amount of zombies and no Carlito. After getting one bomb, Carlito starts very ineffectively chasing Frank in the truck. I don't know if he can actually do anything. He tosses grenades that land behind him while he follows behind Frank, which means they almost never interact with Frank. After getting the second bomb, Kindle's mutiny starts, and Frank can go deal with that if he wants for bonus PP, or just ignore it. Once Frank gets the fourth bomb, Carlito takes the fifth and starts running from Frank. This is actually a fun twist. I think it's pretty cool to have to chase him down and smash into him with the car. It's also really funny that Frank has to do QuickTime events to avoid Carlito despite the fact that he's in a car. So Frank chases down Carlito, crashes into him and flips him, which ends the mission with the same cutscene where Carlito kills Brad and Frank barely escapes with the bombs. Before Case 8 is the woman left behind and the sick man, which are both unchanged, which unlock the bonus mission, A Strange Group. Sean, the cult leader, is slightly different, mostly dumber. He has the same AI quirk as Adam with the rolling, which makes him excessively easy to deal with. The Wii also can't handle 5 followers at a time, so Frank takes 2 the first trip and 3 the second trip, which is very tedious. The only change to Case 8 is that Larry the Butcher goes from threatening to a joke because the shotgun causes him to flinch, so it's just point, click, 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 until he goes down. The facts is unchanged because it's just a cutscene, and between the facts and overtime mode, the only major change is that returning to Isabelle is required. Obviously on the 360 version the game doesn't even prompt the player to return to her to unlock overtime, and as there's no alternate endings, they had to force the player to go see Isabella somehow. Overtime mode has a few significant changes. For most of overtime, zombies don't appear, whereas in the 360 version, they're there the whole time. Instead of 24 hours to cures infection, 2 in-game hours, Frank has 1 hour real time, although the scaled down mall and some other changes make sure it's not that strict of a time limit. As Frank can't manually choose quests, the item collection quest has been reorganized, placing items in a more optimal order that a player would realistically take, as opposed to the scrambled order on 360. Collecting queens has seemingly been made easier, as once zombies reappear at the start of this segment, probably 1 in 10 or 15 have queens, greatly reducing the time to find all 10, on top of them stacking in inventory, which makes multiple trips completely unnecessary. In the cave, Frank no longer drags Isabella behind, obviously. The turret section for the tank fight is now motion controlled, which doesn't sound that bad, but having control jerk around due to Frank's driving is very disorienting when using the pointer controls. There's a reason most light gun rail shooters use smooth or no movement during shooting sections, because it's really jarring to just bump around. The final boss hasn't improved much either, but I know what the game actually wants me to do this time, which is an improvement, I guess. Brock attacks. Sometimes, usually very slowly, and when he does, Frank gets a quick time event to attack back. It takes a while, it's tedious, and there's absolutely nothing to it. Frank can also bring his food and guns into the fights. The food makes it a lot easier, but the guns apparently don't do damage according to the singular guide. That's basically all the major changes to the main game, but there are 2 side modes as well, neither of which is Infinity Mode, thank God. Odd Jobs are a series of bite-sized missions unlocked after beating the game that have all sorts of requirements and varying levels of being good. They're a lot like Smash Bros. Events, very often way too gimmicky, and if not gimmicky, then just way too much shit all thrown at the player at once to try to make it difficult. The ranking system for the main game's missions reappears, but a little more reasonably because they are replayable, unlike the missions in the main game. Let's do this lightning round. Elevator Deathmatch puts Frank in an elevator with an axe, a pistol, and a bunch of zombies. It's excessively basic. Zombie Soccer, Frank must kill zombies with a soccer ball. They're immune to all other damage. It's pretty fun to watch the ball pinball between the zombies, but there's nothing to it. Sunday Driver, drive through 300 zombies in the tunnels. Yep. Beatdown, kill 50 zombies barehanded. This is incredibly tedious. Mega Zombie, Frank needs to kill 4 really large zombies that have gigantic health bars with a pistol. I Want to Ride My Bicycle, a little time trial course on the bike. It's a cute idea and very unique. Undying Horror, run away from invincible zombies for 3 minutes in a small room, very tedious. Zombie Meter Maid is kinda cool because it's a reference to Joe's psychopath fight with the 4 survivors. There are 5 Joes that spawn one after another, but they 2-shot survivors as well as Frank. This is where stuff gets progressively more frustrating because the designers transition into the thought process that the more stuff they throw on screen, the harder the game is. Animal Kingdom, kill 8 parrots and 8 poodles. Meat Processing Area, the first of many psychopath but with more shit thrown on top missions. Fight the Butcher again, but 3 Joes are also there. Not incredibly difficult, but incredibly lazy. Faster than a speeding zombie has incredibly fast zombies that charge Frank. He can use cooking oil to trip them, but they move so fast that it's easier to just beat them to death. Tedious. All your bombs. The description says someone set us up the bomb. Even in 2009, this is pretty dated, and in 2021, I just cringed in disgust. Find 5 bombs in Wonderland Plaza. This is perhaps the most interesting of the odd jobs, which is really sad because it's not that interesting. Invisible zombies. Kill 20 invisible zombies. It's really tedious to try to spot their faint outlines and wander around blindly. Zombie Rush. Kill 100 zombies in a time limit. Lame. Frank vs. the Cult. Fight Sean the Cult Leader and 30 cult members at the same time. Tedious. Crawling Terror. Kill 30 crawling zombies, 5-ish of which are Joes. The Joes 2-shot Frank, but the lawnmower completely breaks their ability to hit him, which makes this not as bad as it probably should be. It's tedious. Helicopter Patrol is fucking terrible. Frank has to use saw blades, which are thrown weapons with no reticle or even a vague guide to destroy 10 Special Forces drones while also dealing with the Special Forces themselves. Tedious. The Phalanx. Fight Sniper Carlito and Sean at the same time. Sniper Carlito is already really tedious because he just runs away like a little bitch, and adding Sean on top of it does not make it better. Sniper Fest is easily the worst mission. Frank has a rifle to fight Sniper Carlito and the Sniper family all at once in pitch black. Frank can't see them and Carlito never stops running. There's constant quick time events. I failed this mission like 6 times, and on my final attempt I got 15 minutes in and died after clearing the family and just dealing with Carlito. The rifle takes so long to aim and Frank doesn't even have a melee weapon. First one I gave up on. Really fucking bad. A very Special Forces cult. Sean Brock and a bunch of cultists and a bunch of Special Forces guys all in one room. Incredibly tedious. Clown Circus. Fight 5 atoms at once. Molotovs make this tolerable, but holy fuck is it lazy. Otis's challenge is a boss rush against Carlito, Cletus, Adam, Sniper Carlito, Steve the grocery store guy, Isabel on the motorcycle, the Sniper family, Sean, Larry the butcher, then Brock with no healing. I think boss rushes are generally lazy game design. It just feels like a cheap way to make difficulty by tossing everything at the player in a row. I didn't finish this one either. I really could not be asked to fight all of these guys again, over and over. Basically, the odd jobs all suck, but maybe the Second Amendment missions will be better. Unlocked by beating any 4 odd jobs, Second Amendment missions are all sniping missions. A bit odd of a choice given that the rifles aren't even controlled with the pointer, they're just controlled with the stick. But maybe they'll be better, we'll see. Instead of grading on time, damage taken, and zombies killed, like the main game and the odd jobs, these minigames are judged on time accuracy and shots used. Less shots is better. It's good that they rethought the grading system for these and it makes them a little more interesting. Lightning Round Act 2, baby. Target Practice 1. Find 1 zombie in a crowd and shoot only him. It's a little too simple. Bodyguard 1. Protect the survivor from zombies. This one is pretty fun. It's wholly different from anything in the main game, which makes it really unique and a little bit of a breath of fresh air. Ducks in a barrel. Shoot 8 zombies quickly. Make it rain. Shoot 8 Special Forces drones. Not bad. Naughty Poodle. Shoot 3 poodles while not shooting regular zombies. I actually really like the style of most of these. It also helps that they tend to be short and sweet. There's nothing incredibly long and drawn out like in the odd jobs. Most of these last like 10-15 seconds. Scarce ammo. Kill 7 far-off zombies with 10 bullets. Too simple. Shooting under pressure. Kill 1 specific zombie in a crowd of fast zombies before getting hit. Again, this one only lasts about 5 seconds long, so it's not that bad, but it's a little plain. The impossible is possible. Just shoot the propane tank and win. Roller Coaster Rampage. This one's an accuracy challenge. Frank rides the roller coaster and has to find and shoot 12 zombies. As long as he hits 1, he passes, but his rank will be lowered by not finding some. It's again a unique and silly challenge that works really well because it's something that the player just had not experienced in any way in the main game. The Adorable Servbot. Zombies and survivors all wear Servbot masks, and Frank must kill all 25 zombies while avoiding survivors. The survivors blend in a little bit too much due to the low quality texturing, but it's a fun little challenge. Target Practice 2. It's the same as the first one, but with 2 zombies to find instead. Covering fire. Shoot 50 zombies while avoiding Special Forces soldiers. Elevator action. Shoot 1 zombie in about 5 seconds. Balloon bursting. Here's where the Second Amendment missions fall apart. Frank needs to shoot balloons off of 6 zombies, 2 parrots and 2 poodles without hitting the zombies. The birds are a constant issue because they can just fly away and not come back, and it also introduces pixel hunting into the mix with this balloon that's nearly entirely hidden. Hide and seek. 5 zombies are hidden very well and Frank needs to shoot them. This one is the peak of the pixel hunting. Some of the zombies just like lay down incredibly far away and they take up like 6 pixels. It's fucking ridiculous. Bodyguard 2. It's like the first, but they took a note out of the odd jobs and threw every enemy in the game in a giant pile and said good luck. It sucks. These last 4 I played, but none of them I could beat because they're all way too annoying. Clear path. Shoot a bunch of garbage to allow a guy to run from a Joe. The vague accuracy required and length of this one wore me out way too fast. Polly wants a cracker. Shoot 4 red parrots and avoid shooting blue parrots. Once again, the parrots can just fly off and be gone, so it's all up to the RNG. No thank you. Give it a shot. Shoot the lights on Carlito's van very quickly. It has the short down, but not the sweets. Clay shooting with Otis. Know that horrible pumpkin shooting game in Skyward Sword, where the pumpkins are never thrown consistently and aiming accurately is really hard because of it? It's that again, but with worse controls, much slower controls. No thank you. In summation, it's much better than the Odd Jobs, and stands out better because of its different gameplay style, plus it stays tolerable longer and doesn't get nearly as awful. It's also quite a bit shorter, little WarioWare style games. The first 3/4 of it are pretty decent, and the last couple are completely fucking awful. As before, the game has a bunch of unlockables. Most are unlocked by getting S ranks in the main game, although Zombie Genocider is still here for a costume. The most interesting unlocks, the Sword and the Mega Buster, are locked behind getting all S ranks and Odd Jobs and Second Amendment respectively. It's a pretty cool incentive for doing the side modes, but it is way too much fucking work for me. I'm not even gonna fucking attempt that. Fuck that. And that's everything there is to Chop Till You Drop. It's honestly a fascinating game. In a lot of ways, it feels like a fan game. It's Resident Evil 4 ROM hack designed to be Dead Rising, but it also feels like a fan game in its love and care. There was an attempt to bring as many aspects of Dead Rising to Chop. Every case is intact, tons of scoops are pulled over, even if not optimally, like the prisoner's scoop, and the mall is really accurate outside of the courtyard and a few shops that are blocked off. There's clearly a lot of passion in it, no matter how imperfect it is. It's also so weird that this game is a demake. It wasn't completely unheard of at the time to release games simultaneously between the 360 and PS3 with the Wii, and the Wii version being a unique game, like Sonic Unleashed and Star Wars The Force Unleashed. But this game released 3 years after the original. It was a far distant demake. I wouldn't even call Chop Till You Drop entirely bad either. It's 2 good games awkwardly smashed together. It's not a great substitute for the real thing, although I could see someone with only a Wii at the time enjoying it as one, but more so a neat curiosity. Non-fans probably wouldn't care, but I think Dead Rising fans will get a kick out of how different and yet how similar it is. I think it's definitely worth looking at for people who love the series, because it's just a really weird way to play a good game. Thank God that's all over. Maybe more is always better. This is certainly an interesting thing to look at.